Chapter 15. Jody moved through a torturous dream with his father beside him. He fought a nest of rattlesnakes. They crawled across his feet, trailing their rattles clacking lightly. The nest resolved itself into one snake, gigantic, moving toward him on a level with his face. It struck, and he tried to scream but could not. He looked for his father. He lay under the rattler, with his eyes open to a dark sky. His body was swollen to the size of a bear. He was dead. Jody began to move backward away from the rattler, one agonized step at a time. His feet were glued to the ground. The snake suddenly vanished, and he stood alone in a vast, windy place, holding the fawn in his arms. Penny was gone. A sense of sorrow filled him so that he thought his heart would break. He awakened, sobbing. He sat up on the hard floor. Day was breaking over the clearing. A pale light lay in streaks beyond the pine trees. The room was filled with grayness. For an instant, he was still conscious of the fawn against him. Then he remembered. He scrambled to his feet and looked at his father. Penny was breathing with greater ease. He was still swollen and fevered, but he looked no worse than when the wild honeybees had stung him. Ma Baxter was asleep in a rocker with her head thrown far back. Old Doc lay across the foot of the bed. Jody whispered, "Doc!" Doc grunted and lifted his head. "What is it? What is it? What is it?" "Doc, look at Pa." Doc shifted his body and eased himself on one elbow. He blinked and rubbed his eyes. He sat up. He leaned over Penny. "Lord of the J-Buds, he made it." Ma Baxter said, "Eh?" She sat upright. "He dead? Not by a long sight." She burst out crying. Doc said, "You sound like you're crying. You're sorry." She said, "You just don't know what 'twould mean him leaving us here." Jody had never heard her speak so gently. Doc said, "Why, you got another man here. Look at Jody now, big enough to plow and reap and do the hunting." She said, "Jody's all right, but he ain't a thing but a boy. Got his mind on nothing but prowling and playing." He hung his head. It was true. She said, "His pa encourages him." Doc said, "Well, boy, be glad you got encouragement. Most of us live our lives without it. Now, ma'am, let's get some more milk down this fellow time he wastes." Jody said eagerly, "I'll go milk, Ma." She said with satisfaction, "'Bout time." He passed through the front room. Buck was sitting up on the floor, rubbing his head sleepily. Millwell was still asleep. Jody said, "Doc says Pa's done made it." "I be dogged. I woke up fixing to go help bury him." Jody went around the side of the house and took down the milk gourd from the wall. He felt as light as the gourd. It seemed to him in his liberation that he might spread his arms and float over the gate, like a feather. The dawn was still nebulous. A mockingbird made a thin metallic sound in a chinaberry. The Dominic rooster crowed uncertainly. This was the hour at which Penny arose, allowing Jody to sleep a little later. The morning was still, with a faint fluttering of breeze through the tops of the tall pine trees. The sunrise reached long fingers into the clearing. As he clicked the lock gate, doves flew from the pines with the whistling of wings. He called exultantly after them, "Hey, doves!" Trixie lowed, hearing him. He climbed into the loft for fodder for her. She was very patient, he thought, giving her milk in return for so poor a feeding. She munched hungrily. She lifted a hind leg once in threat when he was clumsy with the milking. He stripped 2 teats carefully, then turned the calf in with her to nurse on the other 2. There was not as much milk as his father would have gotten from her. He decided that he would drink none himself, so that his father might have all of it until he was well again. The calf butted the sagging udders and sucked noisily. It was too big still to be nursing. The thought of the fawn returned to him. A leaden feeling came over him again. It would be desperate with hunger this morning. He wondered if it would try to nurse the cold teats of the doe. The open flesh of the dead deer would attract the wolves. Perhaps they had found the fawn and had torn its soft body to ribbons. His joy in the morning in his father's living was darkened and tainted. His mind followed the fawn and would not be comforted. His mother took the milk gourd without comment on the quantity. She strained the milk and poured a cupful and took it to the sick room. He followed her. Penny was awake. He smiled weakly. He whispered thickly, "Old Death got to wait a while on me." Doc said, "You belong to be kin to the rattlesnakes, man. How you done it without whiskey, I don't know." Penny whispered, "Why, Doc, I'm a king snake. You know a rattler can't kill a king snake." Buck and Millwheel came into the room. They grinned. Buck said, "You ain't purty, Penny, but by God, you're alive." Doc held the milk to Penny's lips. He swallowed thirstily. Doc said, "I can't take much credit for saving you. Your time just hadn't come to make a die of it." Penny closed his eyes. He said, "I could sleep a week." Doc said, "That's what I want you to do. I can't do no more for you." He stood up and stretched his legs. Ma Baxter said, "Who'll do the farming and him asleep?" Buck said, "What's he got belongs to be done." "Mostly the corn needs another working to be laid by. The taters needs hoeing, but Jody's right good at hoeing do he choose to stick to it." "I'll stick, Ma," Buck said. "I'll stay and work the corn and such." She was flustered. She said stiffly, "I hates to be beholden to you." "Hell, ma'am, there ain't too many of us shifting for a living out here. I'd be a poor man didn't I not stay." She said meekly, "I'm sure obliged. If the corn don't make, we just as good all 3 to die a snake bite." Doc said, "This is the soberest I've waked up since my wife died. I'd be proud to eat breakfast before I go." She bustled to the kitchen. Jody went to build up the fire. She said, "I never figured I'd be beholden to a forester." "Buck ain't exactly a forester, Ma. Buck's a friend." "It do look that way." She filled the coffee pot with water and added fresh coffee to the grounds. She said, "Go to the smokehouse and get that last side of bacon. I'll not be outdone." He brought it proudly. She allowed him to slice the meat. He said, "Ma, Pa shot a doe and used the liver to draw out the pison. He bled himself and then laid on the liver. You should have carried back a haunch of the meat. There wasn't no time to figure on such as that." "That's right, too. Ma, the doe had a fawn." "Well, most does has fawns." "This one was right young, now about newborn." "Well, what about it? Go set the table. Lay out the bright red jelly. The butter's right strong, but it's yet rudder. Lay it out, too." She was stirring up a corn pone. The fat was sizzling in the skillet. She poured in the batter. The bacon crackled in the pan. She turned and flattened the slices so that they would brown evenly. He wondered if they would ever be able to fill up Buck and Millwheel, accustomed to the copiousness of forester victuals. He said, "Make a heap of gravy, Ma." If'n you'll do without your milk, I'll make milk gravy. The sacrifice was nothing. He said, we could have killed a chicken. I studied on it, but they're all too young or too old. She turned the corn pone. The coffee began to boil. He said, I could have shot some doves or some squirrels this morning. Fine time to think of it. Go tell the men folks to wash themselves and come to table. He called them. The 3 men went outside to the water shelf and slapped water over their faces and dabbled their hands. He brought them a clean towel. Doc said, blessed if I don't get hungry when I'm sober. Millwell said, whiskey's a food. You could live on whiskey. I could live on whiskey. Doc said, I've near about done it. 20 years since my wife died. Jody was proud of the table. There were not as many different dishes as the Forresters served, but there was enough of everything. The men ate greedily. At last they pushed away their plates and lit their pipes. Millwell said, seems like Sunday, don't it? Ma Baxter said, sickness allus do seem like Sunday some way. Folks setting around and the men not going to the field. Jody had never seen her so amiable. She had waited to eat until the men were done, for fear of their not having plenty. She sat now eating with relish. The men chatted idly. Jody allowed his thoughts to drift back to the fawn. He could not keep it out of his mind. It stood in the back of his memory. It stood in the back of it as close as he had held it in his dreaming, in his arms. He slipped from the table and went to his father's bedside. Penny lay at rest. His eyes were open and clear, but the pupils were still dark and dilated. Jody said, how you coming, Pa? Just fine, son. Old Dad gone thieving elsewhere, but ain't it a close squeak? I mean, Penny said, I'm proud of you, boy, the way you kept your head and done what was needed. Pa? Yes, son. Pa, you recollect the doe and the fawn? I can't never forget 'em. The poor doe saved me, and that's certain. Pa, the fawn may be out there yet. He's hungry and likely mighty scared. I reckon so. Pa, I'm 'bout growed, and I don't need no milk. How about me going out and seeing can I find the fawn? And tote it here? And raise it? Penny lay quiet, staring at the ceiling. Boy, you got me hemmed in. It won't take much to raise it, Pa. It'll soon get to where it can make out on leaves and acorns. Dogged if you don't figure the forest of every young'un I ever knowed. We cakened his mammy, and it ain't no ways to blame. Sure don't seem grateful to leave it starved, do it? Son, I ain't got it in my heart to say no to you. I never figured I'd see daylight come dawn today. Can I ride back with Millwell and see can I find it? Tell your ma I said you're to go. He sidled back to the table and sat down. His mother was pouring coffee for everyone. He said, Ma, Pa says I can bring back the fawn. She held the coffee pot in midair. What fawn? The fawn belonged to the doe we killed, to use the liver to draw out the poison and save Pa. She gasped. Well, for pity's sake. Pa said he'd not be grateful to leave it starve. Doc Wilson said, that's right, ma'am. Nothing in the world don't ever come quite free. The boy's right and his daddy's right. Millwell said, he can ride back with me. I help him find it. She set down the pot helplessly. Well, if you'll give it your milk, we got nothing else to feed it. That's what I aim to do. It'll be no time in it not needing nothing. The men rose from the table. Doc said, I don't look for nothing but progress, ma'am. But if it takes a turn for the worse, you know where to find me. She said, well, what do we owe you, Doc? We can't pay right now, but time the crops is made. Pay for what? I done nothing. He was safe before I got here. I've had a night's lodging and a good breakfast. Send me some syrup when your cane's ground. You're mighty good, Doc. We've been scrambling so. I didn't know folks could be so good. Hush, woman. You got a good man there. Why wouldn't folks be good to him? Buck said, You reckon that old horse of Penny's keep ahead of me at the plow? I'm like to run him down. Doc said, Get as much milk down Penny as he'll take. Then give him greens and fresh meat, if you can get it. Buck said, Me and Jody'll tend to that. Millwell said, Come on, boy, we got to get riding. Ma Baxter asked anxiously, You'll not be gone long. Jody said, I'll be back shore before dinner. Reckon you'd not get home at all, she said, if 'twasn't for dinner time. Doc said, That's man nature, ma'am. 3 things bring a man home again. His bed, his woman, and his dinner. Buck and Millwell guffawed. Doc's eye caught the cream-colored coonskin knapsack. Now, ain't that a pretty something? Wouldn't I like such as that to tote my medicines? Jody had never before possessed a thing that was worth giving away. He took it from its nail and put it in Doc's hands. It's mine, he said. Take it. Why, I'd not rob you, boy. I got no use for it, he said loftily. I can get me another. Nah, thank you. Every trip I make, I'll think, Thank you, Jody Baxter. He was proud with old Doc's pleasure. They went outside to water the horses and feed them from the scanty stock of hay in the Baxter barn. Buck said to Jody, You Baxters is making out, and that's about all, ain't it? Doc said, Baxter's had to carry the work alone. Time the boy here gets some size to him, they'll prosper. Buck said, Size don't seem to mean much to a Baxter. Millwell mounted his horse and pulled Jody up behind him. Doc mounted and turned away in the opposite direction. Jody waved after him. His heart was light. He said to Millwell, You reckon the fawn's yet there? Will you help me find him? We'll find him, do he be alive. Now, how you know it's a he? The spots was all in a line. On a doe fawn, Pa says the spots is every which way. That's the female of it. What do you mean? Why, females is unaccountable. Millwell slapped the horse's flank, and they broke into a trot. This female business, how come you and your pa to pitch into us when we was fighting Oliver Hutto? Oliver was getting the worst of it. It didn't seem right a hump passel of you old whopping Oliver. You right. It were Lim's gal and Oliver's gal. They should have fitted out alone. But a gal can't belong to 2 fellers at once. You just don't know gals. I hate Twink Weatherby. I'd not look at her neither. I got a widder woman at Fort Gates knows how to be faithful. The matter was too complicated. Jody gave himself over to thoughts of the fawn. They passed the abandoned clearing. He said, Cut to the north, Millwell. Hit were up here where Pa got snake bit and killed the doe, and I seed the fawn. What was you and your daddy doing up this road? Jody hesitated. We was hunting our hogs. Oh, hunting your hogs, eh? Well, don't fret about them hogs. I just got an ID they'll be home by sundown. Ma and Pa'll sure be proud to see 'em come in. I had no idea you all was running so tight. We ain't running tight. We're all right. You Baxters has got guts. I'll say that. You reckon Pa'll not die? Not him. His chitlins is made of iron. Jody said, Tell me about Father Wing. Is he sure enough ailing, or didn't Lim want I should see him? He's purely ailing. He ain't like the rest of us. He ain't like nobody. Seems like he drinks air instead of water, and feeds on what the wild creatures feeds on instead of bacon. He sees things ain't so, don't he? Spaniards and sich? He do, but dogged if they ain't times he'll make you think he do see 'em. You reckon Lem will leave me come see him? I'd not risk it yet. I'll get word to you one day when maybe Lem's gone off, see? I sure crave to see Father Wing. You'll see him. Now, what about you want to go hunting that fawn? It's getting right thick up this trail. Suddenly, Jody was unwilling to have Millwell with him. If the fawn was dead or could not be found, he could not have his disappointment seen. And if the fawn was there, the meeting would be so lovely and so secret that he could not endure to share it. He said, "It's not fur now, but it's powerful thick for a horse. I can make it afoot." But I'm destined to leave you, boy. Suppose you was to get lost or snake bit too. I'll take care. It'll take me likely a long time to find the fawn if he's wandered. Leave me off right here. All right, but you go mighty easy now poking in them palmeters. This rattlesnake heaven in these parts. You know north here and east? There and there. That fertile pine makes a barren. That's right. Now do things go wrong again, you'll buck. One right back for me, so long. That's right. Now do things go wrong again, you or buck. One right back for me, so long. So long, Millwell. I'm sure obliged. He waved after him. He waited for the sound of the hooves to end, then cut to the right. The scrub was still. Only his own crackling of twigs sounded across the silence. He was eager almost past caution, but he broke a bough and pushed it in ahead of him where the growth was thick and the ground invisible. Rattlers got out of the way when they had a chance. Penny had gone farther into the oak thicket than he remembered. He wondered for an instant if he had mistaken his direction. Then a buzzard rose in front of him and flapped into the air. He came into the clearing under the oaks. Buzzards sat in a circle around the carcass of the doe. They turned their heads on their long, scrawny necks and hissed at him. He threw his bow at him, and they flew into an adjacent tree. Their wings creaked and whistled like rusty pump handles. The sand showed large cat prints. He could not tell whether a wildcat or a panther, but the big cats killed fresh, and they had left the doe to the carrion birds. He asked himself whether the sweeter meat of the fawn had scented the air for the curled nostrils. He skirted the carcass and parted the grass at the place where he had seen the fawn. It did not seem possible that it was only yesterday. The fawn was not there. He circled the clearing. There was no sound, no sign. The buzzards clacked their wings, impatient to return to their business. He returned to the spot where the fawn had emerged and dropped to all fours, studying the sand for the small hoof prints. The night's rain had washed away all the tracks except those of cat and buzzard, but the cat sign had not been made in this direction. Under a scrub palmetto, he was able to make out a track, pointed and dainty as the mark of a ground dove. He crawled past the palmetto. Movement directly in front of him startled him so that he tumbled backward. The fawn lifted its face to his. It turned its head with wide, wondering motion and shook him through with the stare of its liquid eyes. It was quivering. It made no effort to rise or run. Jody could not trust himself to move. He whispered, "It's me." The fawn lifted its nose, scenting him. He reached out one hand and laid it on the soft neck. The touch made him delirious. He moved forward on all fours until he was close beside it. He put his arms around its body. A light convulsion passed over it, but it did not stir. He stroked its sides as gently as though the fawn were a china deer, and he might break it. The skin was softer than the white coonskin knapsack. It was sleek and clean and had the sweet scent of grass. He rose slowly and lifted the fawn from the ground. It was no heavier than old Julia. Its legs hung limply. They were surprisingly long, and he had to hoist the fawn as high as possible under his arm. He was afraid that it might kick and bleed at sight and smell of its mother. He skirted the clearing and pushed his way into the thicket. It was difficult to fight through with his burden. The fawn's legs caught in the bushes, and he could not lift his own with freedom. He tried to shield its face from the prickling vines. Its head bobbed with his stride. His heart thumped with the marvel of its acceptance of him. He reached the trail and walked as fast as he could until he came to the intersection with the road home. He stopped to rest and set the fawn down on its dangling legs. It wavered on them. It looked at him and bleated. He said, enchanted, "I'll tote you time I get my breath." He remembered his father saying that a fawn would follow that had been first carried. He started away slowly. The fawn stared after him. He came back to it and stroked it and walked away again. It took a few wobbling steps toward him and cried piteously. It was willing to follow him. It belonged to him. It was his own. He was light-headed with his joy. He wanted to fondle it, to run and romp with it, to call it to come to him. He dared not alarm it. He picked it up and carried it in front of him over his two arms. It seemed to him that he walked without effort. He had the strength of a forester. His arms began to ache, and he was forced to stop again. When he walked on, the fawn followed him at once. He allowed it to walk a little distance, then picked it up again. The distance home was nothing. He could have walked all day and into the night, carrying it and watching it follow. He was wet with sweat, but a light breeze blew through the June morning, cooling him. The sky was as clear as spring water in a blue china cup. He came to the clearing. It was fresh and green after the night's rain. He could see Buck Forrester following old Caesar at the plow in the cornfield. He thought he heard him curse the horse's slowness. He fumbled with the gate latch and was finally obliged to set down the fawn to manage it. It came to him that he would walk into the house, into Penny's bedroom, with the fawn walking behind him. But at the steps, the fawn balked and refused to climb them. He picked it up and went to his father. Penny lay with closed eyes. Jody called, "Pa, look it!" Penny turned his head. Jody stood beside him. The fawn clutched hard against him. It seemed to Penny that the boy's eyes were as bright as the fawn's. His face lightened, seeing them together. He said, "I'm proud you found him." "Pa, he wasn't scared of me. He were laying right up where his mammy had made his bed. The does learn 'em that time they're born. You can step on a fawn times. They lay so still. Pa, I toted him, and when I set him down, right off he followed me, like a dog, Pa. Ain't that fine? Let's see him better." Jody lifted the fawn high. Penny reached out a hand and touched its nose. It bleated and reached hopefully for his fingers. He said, "Well, little feller, I'm sorry I had to take away your mammy." "You reckon he misses her?" "No, he misses his rations, and he knows that. He misses something else, but he don't know just what." Ma Baxter came into the room. "Look, Ma, I found him." "I see." "Ain't he purty, Ma? Look at them spots in all rows. Look at them big eyes. Ain't he purty?" "He's powerful young. It'll take milk for him a long whiles. I don't know as I'd give my consent if I'd knowed he was so young." Penny said, "Horry, I got one thing to say, and I'm saying it now, and then I'll have no more talk of it. The little fawns is welcome in this house as Jody. It's his'n. We'll raise it without grudgment of milk or meal. You got me to answer to. Do I ever hear you quarreling about it? This is Jody's fawn, just like Julia's my dog." Jody had never heard his father speak to her so sternly. The tone must hold familiarity for his mother, however, for she opened and shut her mouth and blinked her eyes. She said, "I only said it was young." "All right, so it is." He closed his eyes. He said, "If everybody's satisfied now, I thank you to leave me rest. It puts my heart to jerking to talk." Jody said, "I'll fix its milk, Ma. No need you should bother." She was silent. He went into the kitchen. The fawn wobbled after him. A pan of morning's milk stood in the kitchen safe. The cream had risen on it. He skimmed the cream into a jug and used his shirt sleeve to wipe up the few drops he could not keep from spilling. If he could keep the fawn from being any trouble to his mother, she would mind it less. He poured milk into a small gourd. He held it out to the fawn. It butted it suddenly, smelling the milk. He saved it precariously from spilling over the floor. He led the fawn outside to the yard and began again. It could make nothing of the milk in the gourd. He dipped his fingers in the milk and thrust them into the fawn's soft, wet mouth. It sucked greedily. When he withdrew them, it bleated frantically and butted him. He dipped his fingers again, and as the fawn sucked, he lowered them slowly into the milk. The fawn blew and sucked and snorted. It stamped its small hooves impatiently. As long as he held his fingers below the level of the milk, the fawn was content. It closed its eyes dreamily. It was ecstasy to feel its tongue against his hand. Its small tail flicked back and forth. The last of the milk vanished in a swirl of foam and gurgling. The fawn bleated and butted, but its frenzy was appeased. Jody was tempted to go for more milk, but even with his father's backing, he was afraid to press his advantage too far. A doe's bag was as small as a yearling heifer's. Surely the fawn had had as much as its mother could have given it. It lay down suddenly, exhausted and replete. He gave his attention to a bed for it. It would be too much to ask to bring it into the house. He went to the shed behind the house and cleaned out a corner down to the sand. He went to the live oaks at the north end of the yard and pulled down armfuls of Spanish moss. He made a thick bed in a shed. A hen was on a nest close by. Her bright, beady eyes watched him dubiously. She finished her laying and flew through the door, cackling. The nest was a new one with 6 eggs in it. Jody gathered them carefully and took them to his mother in the kitchen. He said, "You'll be proud to get these, Ma. Extra eggs. It's a good thing there's something extra around to eat." He ignored the comment. He said, "The new nest is right next to where I fixed the fawn's bed in the shed, where it'll not bother nobody." She did not answer, and he went outside where the fawn lay under a mulberry tree. He gathered it up and carried it to its bed in the dark shed. "Now, you belong to do whatever I tell you," he said, "like as if I was your mammy. I tell you to lay here till I come get you again." The fawn blinked its eyelids. It groaned comfortably and dropped its head. He tiptoed from the shed. No dog, he thought, could be more biddable. He went to the wood pile and shaved fine splinters of fat wood for kindling. He arranged the pile neatly. He gathered an armful of blackjack oak and took it to his mother's wood box in the kitchen. He said, "Was it all right, Ma, the way I skimmed the cream?" "It was all right." He said, "Father Wing's ailing." "Is?" "Lem wouldn't leave me see him. Lem's the only one that's mad at us, Ma. on account of Oliver's gal. Uh-huh. Millwell said he'd leave me knowing I could slip in sometime and see Fodderwing when Lim ain't around. She laughed. You talk about as an old woman today. She passed him on her way to the hearth and touched his head lightly. She said, I feel right good myself. I never figured you pa'd see daylight today. The kitchen was filled with peace. There was a clanking of harness. Buck passed through the gate from the field and crossed the road to the lot, put up old Caesar for the noon hour. Jody said, I best go help him. But it was the fawn that drew him from the contentment of the house. He slipped into the shed to marvel at its existence and his possession. When he returned with Buck from the lot, chattering of the fawn, he beckoned him to follow. He said, Don't scare him. There he lies. Buck was not as satisfying as Penny in his response. He had seen so many of Fodderwing's pets come and go. He'll likely go wild and run off, he said, and went to the water shelf to wash his hands before dinner. A chill came over Jody. Buck was worse than his mother to take away pleasure. He lingered a moment with the fawn, stroking it. It moved its sleepy head and nuzzled his fingers. Buck could not know of the closeness. It was all the better for being secret. He left the fawn and went to the basin and washed too. The touch of the fawn had left his hands scented with a faint grassy pungency. He hated to wash it away, but decided that his mother might not find it as pleasant. His mother had wet and combed her hair for dinner, not with coquetry, but with pride. She wore a clean sacking apron over her brown calico. She said to Buck, With only Penny to do, we ain't got the rations plentiful like you folks, but we do eat clean and decent. Jody looked quickly to see if Buck would take offense. Buck ladled grits into his plate and scooped a hole in the center for the fried eggs and gravy. Now, Miss Ori, don't fret about me. Jody and me'll slip off this evening and get you a mess of squirrels, and maybe a turkey. I see turkey sign in the fur edge of the pea field. Ma Baxter filled a plate for Penny and added a cup of milk. You take it to him, Jody. He went to his father. Penny shook his head at the plate. It looked just plain nasty to me, son. Sit up there and feed me a spoon of the grits and the milk. It wearies me to lift my arm. The swelling had left his face, but his arm was still 3 times its normal size, and his breath came heavily. He swallowed a few mouthfuls of the soft hominy and drank the milk. He motioned the plate away. You getting along all right with your baby? Jody reported on the moss bed. You picked a good place. What you fixin' to name him? I just don't know. I want to name his real special. Buck and Ma Baxter came into the bedroom and sat down to visit. The day was hot and the sun high, and there was no hurrying for anything. Penny said, Jody's in a tight for a name for the new Baxter. Buck said, Tell you, Jody, when you see Fodderwing, he'll pick a name. He's got an ear for such things, just like some folks has got an ear for fiddle music. He'll pick you a name as purty. Ma Baxter said, Go eat your dinner, Jody. That spotted fawn has taken your mind off your rations. The opportunity was choice. He went to the kitchen and heaped a plate with food and went to the shed. The fawn was still drowsy. He sat beside it and ate his dinner. He dipped his fingers in the grease-covered grits and held them out to it, but it only snuffed and turned its head away. He said, You better learn something besides milk. The dirt daubers buzzed in the rafters. He scraped his plate clean and set it aside. He lay down beside the fawn. He put one arm across its neck. It did not seem to him that he could ever be lonely again. And that is the end of chapter 15. Until next time, May the Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and grant you his peace.